There are places in America where houses still stand, streets still exist, and yet no one lives there. Not because of war, not because of a natural disaster, but because something far more disturbing was allowed to happen, quietly, legally, and without anyone being held accountable. What if I told you there was an entire town erased from the map, not because of one crime, but because of a chain of decisions so reckless that investigating them fully would have exposed how deeply broken the system really was? Today, we're going to uncover the true story of Times Beach, a town where families lived, children played, and businesses thrived, all while invisible poison soaked into the ground beneath their feet. This isn't a ghost story. This isn't a conspiracy. This is a real American town that became uninhabitable because of a crime no one ever truly investigated. And once you understand what happened here, you'll never look at abandoned places the same way again. A town built on hope, Times Beach was founded in the 1920s along the banks of the Merrimack River, about 17 miles southwest of St. Louis. At first, it wasn't much more than a collection of summer homes. City families escaped the heat by coming here on weekends, fishing, swimming, and enjoying life away from the smoke and noise of the city. By the 1950s and 1960s, Times Beach had evolved into a permanent, working-class community. More than 2,000 people called it home. There were schools, churches, small businesses, and tight-knit neighborhoods where everyone knew each other. It wasn't wealthy, it wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and most importantly, it was affordable. Something that would later make it especially vulnerable. The dust problem. Times Beach had a problem common to many small towns of its era: dust. Most of the roads were unpaved, and during dry summers, cars kicking up dust made everyday life miserable. It got into homes, businesses, and lungs. The town needed a cheap solution. That solution came in the early 1970s from a man named Russell Bliss. Bliss was a waste oil hauler. His job was to collect used oil and industrial waste from factories and dispose of it. Proper disposal was expensive. Bliss offered towns something different. He proposed spraying waste oil on dirt roads to keep the dust down, a common but poorly regulated practice at the time. It was cheap, effective, and approved by local officials who had no reason to suspect what the oil actually contained. Between 1971 and 1972, Bliss sprayed Times Beach roads repeatedly. No testing was done, and no oversight existed, and no one asked what was really in that oil. The poison nobody saw. What Bliss was spraying wasn't just used motor oil. Mixed into it was dioxin, one of the most toxic chemicals known to science. Dioxin is a byproduct of certain industrial processes, particularly chemical manufacturing. Even in extremely small amounts, it can cause cancer, immune system damage, reproductive disorders, and severe skin disease. The dioxin in Bliss's oil came from waste generated during the production of hexachlorophene, a disinfectant manufactured near St. Louis. This was not an accident. It was illegal dumping disguised as a public service. And it didn't just affect Times Beach. Bliss sprayed contaminated oil at dozens of locations across eastern Missouri, including horse arenas, farms, and other small towns. In some cases, horses died within days. People developed unexplained illnesses. Entire properties had to be quarantined. Yet despite mounting evidence, no immediate large-scale investigation took place. The silence throughout the 1970s. Residents of Times Beach noticed strange things. Children developed persistent rashes. Animals fell ill. Gardens stopped growing properly. But these symptoms were never connected to a single source. There was no centralized health monitoring, no environmental testing, and no warning signs posted. Then, in 1982, the Merrimack River flooded, something it had done many times before. But this flood changed everything. The contaminated soil that had been sprayed for years was washed deeper into the ground, spread across yards, and carried into homes. Soon after, federal agencies tested the area. What they found was alarming. Dioxin levels in Times Beach were hundreds of times higher than what was considered safe. The government steps in, quietly, in 1983. The Environmental Protection Agency, made an unprecedented decision. They announced that Times Beach was too dangerous for human habitation. The federal government bought out every resident's home. Families were relocated. Schools were closed. Businesses shut down. By 1985, the town was officially disincorporated. Times Beach no longer existed. No evacuation sirens. No criminal trials broadcast on television. No public reckoning. Just checks, moving trucks, and silence. The crime that wasn't investigated. Here's where the story becomes deeply unsettling. Yes, some legal action occurred. Russell Bliss was eventually convicted on federal charges related to improper disposal of hazardous waste and served a short prison sentence. But the larger questions were never fully investigated. Who produced the dioxin waste? Who approved its transportation? Who failed to regulate its disposal? Who ignored early warning signs from other contaminated sites? No comprehensive criminal investigation ever examined the full chain of responsibility. Instead, the solution was to erase the town. Bulldozers came. Buildings were demolished. The land was scraped and buried. Times Beach became one of the largest environmental cleanups in U.S. history, but also one of the quietest moral failures. Building over the past, in the 1990s, after years of cleanup costing hundreds of millions of dollars, the land was declared safe. What happened next is rarely discussed. A highway, Interstate 44, now runs directly through what used to be Times Beach. Cars pass every day over ground that once held living rooms, playgrounds, and classrooms. Nearby, Route 66 State Park occupies part of the former town site. Families picnic where homes once stood. Visitors walk trails without knowing the history beneath their feet. There is no large memorial, no museum dedicated to the residents, no national reckoning, just a sign, and a name most people have never heard. Why nobody wanted to dig deeper? Investigating Times Beach fully would have meant confronting uncomfortable truths. It would have required exposing regulatory failures at multiple levels of government. It would have raised questions about industrial accountability, environmental justice, and why poor communities often bear the greatest risks. Most of all, it would have shown that this wasn't a single bad actor. It was a system that allowed profit to outweigh human safety. And systems don't go to prison. The human cost. Former residents of Times Beach have spoken for decades about what they lost. Not just homes, but community, identity, trust. Many reported long-term health issues. Others struggled with the psychological impact of knowing their town was poisoned while they lived there. Some still believe the full truth was never told. And history suggests they may be right. A ghost town without ghosts. Today, Times Beach doesn't look haunted. There are no crumbling buildings, no abandoned schools, no visible ruins. That's what makes it so disturbing. The ghost town isn't what you see. It's what was deliberately covered up. Why this story matters now. Environmental disasters don't always come with explosions or warning sirens. Sometimes they arrive quietly, buried in paperwork and ignored regulations. Times Beach is a reminder that crimes don't need masks or weapons. Sometimes they wear suits. Sometimes they come with permits. Sometimes they end with a check and a bulldozer. And sometimes they leave behind a town that never got justice. If stories like this matter to you, stories that uncover the real history buried beneath forgotten places, then make sure you stay connected. Subscribe to the channel for more deeply researched documentaries about places the world tried to forget. Like this video to help it reach others who care about truth and accountability. And turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. Because some stories were erased on purpose. And telling them might be the only investigation they ever get.